James O'Keefe's Line in the Sand premiering only on TCN on October 10th. You can sign up to watch at tuckercarlson.com. James O'Keefe's new documentary, Line in the Sand, at tuckercarlson.com. So you are you're younger than Kamala Harris, but in the same generation. You're an attorney. You're from San Francisco. You first ran into Kamala Harris in 2003, 21 years ago. You know everyone in her orbit. You live in the same world. And so with less than a month to go before the campaign, I thought it'd be interesting to hear the perspective of someone who actually knows a lot about Kamala Harris's life. Don't seem to be many of those. So thank you for doing this. Who is Kamala Harris exactly?
Well, you see the words comma, chameleon, and, nicknames like that applied to her today.
Yes.
And she really has been kind of a shapeshifter throughout her entire career and existence. I would call her in some ways a survivor. She's had a number of different environments, sort of growing up in Oakland to two university professors as a small kid. And then after divorce, her mom took her and her sister Maya to Canada, where she went to high school and then started
Montreal?
College there. Yeah. And then she, came as almost an adult to the United States and went to Howard University and sort of immersed herself in that culture of the predominantly Black college. And then she came to San Francisco, where she went to Hastings in the Tenderloin area of San Francisco. So educationally, she's kind of traveled all over the United States.
But she spent her high school years in Canada.
Yeah, she spent her high school years in Canada and, not in San Francisco. And so I think one of the interesting things that I found when looking at her background is the first time she registered to vote was at age 29. So
really?
Yeah. So many years after coming to the United States, and during the year that she dated our former mayor and speaker, Willie Brown, is the year that she registered to vote. And so connecting the dots, it seems like that might be the time when she decided that politics is in her future because, she began to create a voting record and setting down roots at that time. But she hadn't
registered to vote before she was
There's
almost
no
30.
record of her having registered to vote until she was almost 30, which is, I have nieces and nephews, and I urge them to get educated and register to vote and get active. And so, it's kind of an important thing. So well after she became an attorney, well after she became a prosecutor, she hadn't registered to vote.
Well, that's interesting. 11 years after she was eligible.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
And that's interesting, not because everyone has to vote, in my opinion, but because she's described herself repeatedly in public as a child activist.
Yeah.
She was basically leading the March on Washington. She single-handedly desegregated the American South.
Right.
She was always into politics.
She was a warrior for freedom. Early on. And
there wasn't, just for the record, there was no segregation.
I mean,
country.
Her mom was interviewed many years ago before she passed away and tells a story about how where they were growing up in Montreal in the apartment complex where they lived, apparently children weren't allowed to play outside. So Kamala Harris single-handedly protested this and organized and forced the apartment building to allow children to be able to play outdoors. So
she was annoying as a child.
She was a activist as a child, according to her mom, but then didn't exercise the most basic form of United States citizen activism by exercising the franchise until much later in life. And
after she was a lawyer, how did she become a lawyer?
Well, she became a lawyer, went to UC Hastings in downtown San Francisco, did not pass the bar the first time she took it, did pass it the second time around, and got her first job after that as a prosecutor in Alameda County. So in Alameda County, she eventually specialized in child sex crimes, an important job. And according to research that was done by some of her opposition when she ran for district attorney in 2003, she tried something like 8 cases that they can prove there during her 8 years or so as a prosecutor in Alameda County.
So I lack perspective on this. Is that a lot? A little?
It's very little.
Very little.
For somebody who's claimed today in all of her public appearances to have been a lifelong law enforcement officer and prosecutor, and when she ran for district attorney, claimed to have tried hundreds of cases. She actually, according to what I've been able to dig up and what her opposition dug up on her in 2003, which she never refuted, 2 cases in San Francisco during the 2 years that she worked at the DA's office before quitting and then planning her run against her boss, 8 in the Alameda County District Attorney's office. So she basically held those 2 jobs as a prosecutor. Now, Terrence Hallinan, let's setting the stage of my meeting her in San Francisco. So San Francisco had a very progressive prosecutor. I think he was elected in 1996 or so, named Terrence Hallinan.
Famous person in California.
Famous guy. He was one of some brothers. My departed husband served on the board of the Liberal Pacifica radio station with one of the other Hallinan brothers. So, they were kind of regulars in the left-wing activist circles in San Francisco. And Hallinan promised to be a progressive prosecutor, and he came on board and was a progressive prosecutor, would serve soup at the soup kitchens and things like that, kind of old school liberal. And that said, he was tough on murders and tough on the serious crimes, but it was the lower level drug dealers and so forth, that quality of life crimes that he was a little bit softer on. But he recruited Kamala Harris, or hired her anyway, and she hired her out of the Alameda County District Attorney's office. And during that campaign in 2003, he actually said that he did it as a favor to the mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown. But there's a mixed record on that. But he gave her chance to move from the job she was in, which was sort of, Alameda County is not San Francisco. San Francisco's the big leagues where all the glamorous stuff happens in the Bay Area, and where we had 2 United States senators from there. A lot of the top brass in California that's now infecting the United States came from San Francisco County. So she was a step up to go to be a prosecutor in the big city there in San Francisco. So she got her opportunity to move over there. And she was the head of the criminal organization's 5-person unit after being there for a bit of time. And so, it was 5 people she was in charge of, but she was passed over for chief of staff, which is the number 2 position in the district attorney's office, on 2 occasions. And, as soon as she got there, she began making her mark and setting her eyes on her political career. Okay. So starting around age 29, again, when she moved to San Francisco, she started dating the mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown. And
while he was mayor?
While he was mayor. And he had been the Speaker of the Assembly. He was maybe the most powerful machine politician in Democrat politics. Willie Brown and John Burton ran San Francisco. They had a political machine. And to win election in that town, their stamp of approval was necessary. And they really had not a complete control, but they were the most formidable bloc to get ahead in San Francisco. So they kind of approved who got to be on the Board of Supervisors, who, really ran for all these different positions and handed out patronage jobs in the city. And so the fastest way to ascend in politics there is to be tied to the coattails of Willie Brown. And so, she did that. And I don't know
more than tied to the coattails.
She's
sleeping with him.
She
right?
dated him.
Yeah.
That's how he describes it. He is still married at the time. And so he's 90 today, but he was married throughout this time that he was together with her for 2 years. Okay. And so they were a society couple. They went to all the operas, ballets, black tie events very openly. And, I've met Willie Brown several times. He just, it's not disputed that he gave her start in politics. And almost certainly encouraged her, hey, maybe you should register to vote. That might be a good start. Certainly how to move up in the ranks. And so one of the ways you do that is you get started with some lower level elective office. But even before that, a lot of our politicians in Congress and in the Senate and, former presidents have been lawyers. It's a great stepping stone to a political career. So getting a good record in the DA's office would have been a way to do that. So she, hustled her way into the district attorney's office and immediately began setting her sights on her power base. So she developed relationships in the African-American community, became friendly with Amos Brown, a notorious pastor and activist in the Bayview Hunters Point district, where is a large African-American population there. Yep. And, it's one of the rougher parts of town where the projects are. A lot of the drug and gang violence was centered in that area. And so she tried to make that her patch. And her theme was, supposedly hard on crime, but not in an unfair, disproportionate way on the African-American community. So as you know, during that time, the 1990s, there was a lot of discussion in our country about harsh drug laws and disproportionate impact on African-Americans. And so she kind of focused her efforts on that. And that was her assignment, was criminal organizations, basically gangs. Okay, so she was a gang and drug prosecutor, not a murder prosecutor, not a violent crime prosecutor. She never was that in her jobs before she became the district attorney. So she wanted those jobs, according to reporting at the time. She wanted to be moved up to the more serious responsibilities of violent crime and murder prosecutor, but she never was given that opportunity by Terrence Hallinan, who I think, reading between the lines, began to suspect that she was gunning for his job pretty early on. So after she was passed over a couple of times for the top lieutenant position in the district attorney's office, she quit. She quit and she went immediately sideways to the city attorney's office in San Francisco, which is also a prominent breeding ground for some excellent judges I've been in front of, have been city attorneys. Dennis Herrera was the city attorney at the time, and he held that position for a very long time. So she moved sideways after less than 2 years at the district attorney's office to the city attorney's office, where she put together a portfolio involving child welfare and, sort of juvenile offenders, that sort of a thing. Again, I would call it a pretty fluffy portfolio, but something that's designed to give her something to talk about if she runs for office. And so for 2 or 3 years, she spent her time there at the city attorney's office. Again, by the way, all on the, public employment. She's never had a job in the private sector. Ever. And so
Kamala Harris has been living on taxpayer money her entire
career. That's correct. She's never had a private sector job. Now, let me pause for a second. While she was doing some of these jobs, she actually was doing multiple jobs on paper, because Willie Brown, one of the positions that you get access to when you're the speaker, and then you pretty much continue to have a lot of access to over the years, is the ability to appoint people to patronage jobs. And so before he, kind of left the speaker's office, he was able to appoint her to one of 2 commissions. So she was on a taxpayer-funded commission called the Unemployment Appeals Board. And so you hear appeals of denials of unemployment benefits. That's a cushy part-time job, which pays almost $100,000 salary. You show up a couple of days a month. And then he also got her appointed to a second sort of part-time job, very part-time, a couple of days a month again, called the Medical Assistance Commission, which was dealing with Medi-Cal contracts and appeals over that. And so over the years that she was taking a salary as first an Alameda County prosecutor and then a San Francisco County prosecutor, she earned an additional over $400,000 over a 5-year period from these low-show / no-show jobs. He also got her a BMW as a gift. And so
Willie Brown gave Kamala Harris a BMW?
He gave her a BMW, and he got her these extra hundreds of thousands of dollars of jobs. And to give you some perspective, the salary of a prosecutor around that time was about $100,000. So she basically got double or triple what her colleagues were getting. So imagine the morale in the office when your person sitting next to you is also dating the mayor and also is making hundreds of thousands of dollars more than you because...
And getting a free BMW.
So she was marked out as privileged in her 20s and 30s very early on. And that allowed her to leap over the career hurdles that those of us who work for a living in the private sector have to actually earn, right? And I think she's had to face these criticisms over time, and she's become very glib and good at deflecting the criticism, but I don't think it's disputable that the extra income and, more importantly, the patronage that she enjoyed in her 20s and early 30s made her the person who's the vice president of the United States today and seeking the top job. Not merit, but influence peddling and using her female wiles.
And just all the sleaze and corruption that inevitably arises in a one-party state like California.
Multiplied by 100 when you're dating the most, powerful person there. And even after she broke up with him, as the story goes, because she realized that he was never going to make her a wife, she continued that strong relationship. And to this day, Willie Brown has endorsed her and is, out there helping her raise money. And so she had broken up with him by the time she ran for district attorney, but he was instrumental in helping her raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and eventually winning in that position.
Willie Brown has a reputation for the last 60 years for corruption. I'm not alleging a specific crime. He was a jailhouse lawyer for years, representing radicals of various kinds. But he has a reputation for corruption. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And even specifically in this district attorney race. So I'll break that down for you. So Terrence Hallinan was a mixed bag. He was the district attorney for, the one who Kamala Harris replaced. And so, but he was tough on corruption. Okay. So there was some corruption in the police department in San Francisco. The SFPD had a scandal called Fajita Gate, where some cops got into a beef with some street vendors over some fajitas. It's kind of a silly beginning of the story, but the end of that story is that Terrence Hallinan brought charges against the police chief, his deputy, and some other cops involved in this scandal. Okay, well, Willie Brown didn't like this. He had put all these people, basically everybody in the top jobs in San Francisco owed it in some way to Willie Brown. And so Willie Brown was able to get stuff done in the city as a lobbyist and as a fixer, and particularly for the real estate industry by controlling a lot of the elected officials and the law enforcement in San Francisco. There were corruption investigations that Terrence Hallinan was looking at regarding some of this power structure in San Francisco. And so by replacing Terrence Hallinan, Willie Brown, through his agent of Kamala Harris, was able to put an end to some of these investigations. These investigations were quietly dropped. The Fajita Gate thing quietly went away. The case collapsed. And the police who were accused of wrongdoing were never held accountable. But because of that investigation and indictments that were brought by Terrence Hallinan, that began some friction, that continued some friction. The police were also frustrated at Hallinan's failure to take drug dealers off the streets. So Willie Brown, through that dint of getting his former mistress the DA job by helping her raise money, getting her key endorsements from the socialites, the Getty family, and all the top families in San Francisco who backed her, the founder of North Face and others.
Getty family would be the patrons of Gavin Newsom, now the governor.
Gavin Newsom's patrons and the patrons, I mean, I think they're supporters of Kamala Harris and others. They've supported every major Democrat elite in California. And so, their Pacific Heights establishment, noblesse, oblige
Pacific
there.
Heights being one of the richest neighborhoods in San Francisco.
Absolutely. And so fundraisers, glittering events, black tie events, patrons of the arts, these are the folks, these are the circles that Kamala Harris moved in through Willie Brown's assistance. And so Willie Brown was able to put an end to pesky investigations into corruption in San Francisco and misconduct by the police department by getting Kamala Harris installed over there. So everything became smooth again when she became the district attorney, and stayed that way under control for many years while she was the district attorney until she ran for attorney general.
So every year when Apple releases the overpriced new iPhone, the big carriers play the same old game. Sign up now, next 2 years, some big cellular contract, get a free iPhone. Well, what do you give up in return? A lot. Don't fall for it this time. Choose Pure Talk. With Pure Talk, you get great savings on the new iPhone 16, and you still get an affordable data plan that fits your needs on America's most dependable 5G network. Stop falling into the same trap and paying for unlimited data that you're probably not going to use. Pay for what you use. With Pure Talk, for just $25 a month, you get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data. That's more than enough for most people. If it's not enough for you, you can buy more. But it probably is, so why pay for something you're not going to use? With Pure Talk, you don't have to. It's proudly veteran-led, and its entire customer service team is right here in the United States, the country that you live in, so everyone can understand each other pretty well, and they're responsive. No contract, no cancellation fees, 30-day money-back guarantee. Pure Talk is easy to switch to. The average family saves almost $1,000 a year when they switch. Try it. Go to puretalk.com/Tucker, and you'll save an additional 50% off your very first month. That's puretalk.com/Tucker. Switch your cell service to a company you can be proud to do business with.
During this period, how did she pronounce her first name? And I ask because she's on video pronouncing it Kamala and Kamala. 2 different ways.
So I remember her putting the emphasis on the second syllable, so it was like Kamala.
Kamala.
Kamala was how she pronounced it.
Not Kamala.
Not Kamala. Kamala is actually how Indians pronounce it. The name derives from the word for lotus in Sanskrit, which is komal. So,
really?
Yeah. And so, that is how you're supposed to pronounce it.
Is it a conventional name?
It's a conventional name, absolutely. And it's a Brahmin. She's from a Brahmin family. Her mother is Brahmin, and so high caste
Brahmin.
background.
I thought she was oppressed.
Well, she's a shapeshifter, like I said. So although I saw an explanation in one of these liberal publications trying to explain how throughout most of her career she's passed as African American and not mixed race, because of course not until Tiger Woods became prominent did people parse out their differences in their racial background. So, it was suggested that she had to pick one or the other early in her career, and she largely identified as African American. And so she really focused on the African American community in San Francisco. She identified as African American.
Did she live in a black neighborhood? Did she live in Hunters Point?
She did not live in Hunters Point.
Oh, she
didn't. No, she lived in a nice condo in the South of Market in the ballpark area.
Right,
yeah, absolutely.
But she was, quote, focused on the African
She was focused on the African American community. Now, I've read just about everything that's been written about her, and back in that time period, Willie Brown actually got one of his political clients and patrons to rent her campaign headquarters in Bayview, Hunters Point, not where she lived and not where the courthouse is, but she had her campaign headquarters in that African-American neighborhood at well below market rent from a connection of Willie Brown.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's pretty blatant.
Rewind just for one moment. It's not controversial to say, because it's factual, it's provable, she has pronounced her own first name at least 2 different ways.
I think 3 or 4 different ways.
3 or 4 different ways.
Yep.
So if we can just like consider for a moment how weird that is. You have a non-Anglo first name.
Yeah.
Harmeet.
That's right.
Indian name, I assume.
It's been pronounced consistently
right.
since childhood. Yeah.
By you because it's your name.
That's my name. Yeah. And I haven't pretended to be different things over the years.
But have you ever met anyone who's pronounced his or her own first name different ways over a period of time?
I really haven't. And it was striking to me when she was running for district attorney is when I first met her. And I was new to San Francisco. I just moved to San Francisco in 2003. I came to California in 2000 and during the .com boom, and I went down to Silicon Valley. I practiced law there. And then I moved to San Francisco in 2003. I was new to town. So I had a friend from the South Asian Bar Association who'd practiced with her in the DA's office in Alameda County, who was, helping her with her DA run. So I went to this fundraiser. I was new to town and, Kamala Harris walks into the fundraiser. It was all Indian Americans at this particular fundraiser. And so she was, she was all business, no nonsense, strides into the room wearing a designer outfit, well beyond her means as a district attorney, assistant district attorney, or at that time, city attorney employee. Like 4-inch heels, strides confidently into the room and begins telling us why she's going to be the better candidate than Terrence Hallinan, who was running for re-election. And I recall from that meeting, she was really focused on process. She didn't really have a policy difference with Terrence Hallinan. She has also always painted herself as a progressive, but tough on crime, but progressive prosecutor. Okay, so she talked a lot about how the computers in the district attorney's office were outdated and, we really needed to professionalize the office. I mean, who could argue with that, right? I mean, of course, the district attorney's office in a major American city should have up-to-date computers. I mean, I had them in my law firm practice. And so that sounded good. And, she also criticized Hallinan for being soft on crime, which in retrospect is not fair because she had a much worse record than him in prosecuting violent crime. But I'll get to that. But, she really portrayed herself as just being the younger, more competent, liberal, but tough on crime prosecutor. And so she was planning to prosecute marijuana and drug offenses. She was planning to prosecute, all these quality of life crimes that Hallinan allegedly wasn't prosecuting. And so that was her selling point in this fundraiser. But when I saw her in other settings, she didn't identify with the Indian American community at all. And so I saw her in South Asian Bar Association events after she became the district attorney and otherwise. And so when she came into an event where there were Indian Americans there, like a South Asian lawyers event, she was all, namaste and, all of that. But you never saw that outside that setting, right? So
she didn't do that in Hunters Point.
She didn't do that in
She didn't do any namastes at all?
There was no namaste in Hunters Point.
That would have been hilarious.
No, so that's fake. And I immediately saw that when I saw her in more than one setting, that this woman is just pandering to whoever's in front of her, which is, of course, you and I have been around a lot of politicians over the years. That's a common theme in politics, right? But the extent to which she was willing to just adopt and abandon personae was
and it's the
truly
self-righteousness
striking.
too. I mean, of course, every politician panders. I think people pander to each other. It's all very common and very human. But when caught, you don't scream at the other person and call that person a racist for noticing, which is exactly her response. I mean, Trump made that point. It was a totally fair point. I thought she was Indian. Now she's black. Well, it sounds like he had reason to say that. All of a sudden, shut up, racist.
Absolutely. Well, let me pick up on that for a second. So it's been really striking in this campaign for president, and even when she ran for president in 2019 and 2020, how she's very self-righteous about being in law enforcement and, a top cop and a border cop and just like this law enforcement icon. But she actually began her career in politics by breaking the law on multiple occasions. And so this dates back even to before she ran for the district attorney position. In 2000, Willie Brown asked her to take a break from her job at the city attorney's office, take a little leave of absence, and do some work for Amos Brown, this notorious pastor who was running for re-election for the Board of Supervisors. And Amos Brown was representing that African-American community, and he was one of Willie Brown's people. right? And so she had no background in politics or anything, but, he thought, well, this is a good way for you to learn the ropes of how a campaign is run. And it is a good way. Volunteering for a campaign is a good way to do that. She wasn't a volunteer, though. That's the key point. She was paid as a political consultant by Amos Brown's campaign, but she never registered under city law, which requires all political consultants who are paid by a campaign more than $1,000 to register. And so she was paid, I think, almost $10,000 during this time she worked there. She never registered. She was called out on it, and she skated. She explained she didn't know the rules, and she hadn't really intended anything. And so I think a fine or some penalty was paid at that point. And that was the beginning of simply giving the middle finger to the law by Kamala Harris. She got herself embroiled in a much bigger scandal when she ran for district attorney. So in San Francisco, like many of our liberal cities in California, there's campaign finance, matching funds that are available, but there's also a benefit that you get if you agree to voluntarily cap your raising and spending. At the time, for mayor, I think it was a little bit higher, but for district attorney and mayor, it might have been the same. It was $211,000. So if you agreed to cap your raising and spending at $211,000 in 2003, you got a statement published in the voter guide that's mailed to all the almost 500,000 voters in San Francisco, registered voters, saying that you had voluntarily agreed to confine yourself to that spending cap. So it's like a level playing field. And it's a little bit of a gold star that you're agreeing not to engage in corruption, wasteful spending, cronyism by raising money from all kinds of unknown sources. So she agreed to that. She filed a piece of paper. She signed it under penalty of perjury saying, I, Kamala Harris, agree to this voluntary spending limit. Most of the other candidates in the race and candidates for mayor during that race, they also agreed to that spending limit. Okay, so most of the candidates running for office in California, in San Francisco rather, agreed to that spending limit. Well, it turns out that Kamala Harris, who, by the way, started out in this campaign third, behind her boss, Terrence Hallinan, who was in the lead, and then a guy named Vic Fazio, who was a former prosecutor, then defense attorney, who was going to be the hard-on-crime guy. He was eventually endorsed by the Republicans in San Francisco. So she was third. She was the underdog. And so she was getting no traction at first. So she realized she was going to have to really supercharge her spending. Willie Brown helped her with this. Willie Brown also helped raise money for independent expenditures to support her as well. So it's a funny story, but one of her campaign themes was that she was going to be tough on drugs, tough on marijuana. And back in 2003, the recreational use of marijuana was not legal in California. And so she was going to be tough on pot. So apparently some pot activists who didn't like this, they were poring over the campaign finance records, and it's a pot activist who realized that Kamala Harris had raised over $300,000 and had spent over $300,000. So this person went and let the other campaigns know. They filed an ethics complaint against her. And at the end of the election, she had spent over $600,000, so triple the amount that she was allowed. But thanks to hiring a good lawyer and making the excuse that, the form changed, I didn't really understand the meaning of this, so please lift the cap, she got the San Francisco Ethics Commission, and by the way, many of those people on the Ethics Commission owed their positions to Willie Brown. She got them to look the other way on this gross violation. It's a crime, by the way. She could have been prosecuted for a misdemeanor had she been properly held accountable for this significant campaign finance violation, and anybody else would have. But the Ethics Commission simply lifted the cap, which is not in the statute. So instead of disqualifying her, which would have been the normal punishment, and prosecuting her, she simply got away with it. So in her first race for elected office, she ignored the campaign finance limits. She used corrupt patronage from her former lover to raise the money necessary to do the glossy ads. I've got several examples here. She did more mailers than all of the other candidates. She had independent expenditures on her behalf, and she simply was able to outspend and blow through these limits. And
You've got an ad from the race in 2000.
I have a lot of this material here from 2003. And so this is all the people who endorsed her, and this is all the main political machine there in San Francisco. Now, one of those guys is in jail for, he's a former state senator, Leland Yee. He was later indicted for
the Reverend Cecil Williams.
Reverend Cecil Williams.
And he was involved with Jim Jones, but maybe I'm misremembering that.
There's a lot of blast from the past over there. Because she raised so much money, she was able to send multiple of these, big glossy mailers.
She's today's voice for justice.
Yeah, today's voice for justice, Kamala Harris for district attorney, Aaron Peskin, Fiona Ma, some of the shadiest politicians in California are here on her endorsement list. Of course, Willie Brown. She was, she checked all the boxes to get the gay community on board, the Asian community on board. She really put the coalition together thanks to the mentorship she enjoyed. Here's Assemblyman Mark Leno. No one is better prepared to lead our district attorney's office in this new era than Kamala Harris. Well, they're actually almost every prosecutor in that office was better prepared. Terrence Hallinan was better prepared. Vic Fazio was better prepared. So by simply outspending and violating the campaign finance cap, she was able to win this election. She got it into the runoff, and then she was able to win in the runoff against her boss. So it was a pretty incredible upset. This is another one of her glossy mailers. So she's a veteran prosecutor with 13 years of courtroom experience and a 90% conviction rate. She actually had only been a prosecutor for 10 years, and her conviction rate, you can manipulate any statistic you want by simply changing the numerator and the denominator. And so, it's pretty incredible that the birth of this meteoric career comes out of multiple campaign finance violations.
So she won.
She won that race. One of the mailers from the other side is a mailer from the tenants union, which was supporting Kamala Harris. Supporting Terrence Hallinan. And they pointed out that she had committed another violation, and that is soliciting money from landlords who she was supposed to be regulating in her job at the city attorney's office. So one of her jobs in the city attorney's office involved, sort of the welfare of people who were on public assistance. And that included people in the SRO, single residence housing, and Section 8 housing.
Big in San Francisco.
It's a lot of our residents are on public assistance and live in this kind of housing. And so she happily took tens of thousands of dollars from slumlords who she was supposed to be regulating in this campaign. And the tenants union, there's a mailer in here I have somewhere that talks about her taking money from the Roach motels. And, they were able to put that one mailer out, but it ended up not convincing.
And San Francisco has more
people.
Roach motels than any city in the United States.
I think per square foot, it's probably
number one.
So we're getting pretty close to the presidential election. That probably has you thinking about the future and possibly feeling a little anxious about it. So what can you do to secure your future? Well, probably a lot of things, but maybe one of the first, and this is not glamorous, but get some life insurance. According to the annual Insurance Barometer study, 41% of people don't have the coverage they need should something unexpected happen to them, and unexpected things happen. In fact, it's going to happen to all of us, not to be morbid. You don't want to leave a mess behind. You've got people who love you and depend on you. They have mortgage payments or credit card debt. They need money, and you don't want to leave them in the lurch. And that has happened, probably to people you know. And that's why we're proud to partner with Policy Genius. It's a very straightforward tool that helps you find the right life insurance policy at the best price, so you can have some peace of mind. Policy Genius, it is easy. You can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. And if you're in the business of avoiding unnecessary medical exams, that's good news. Policy Genius combines the best of a fast and easy-to-use digital tool with the expertise of real licensed agents. You compare quotes from America's top insurance side by side for free, so it's not confusing and you don't suspect that you're getting shafted because you're not. Go to policygenius.com/Tucker to get your free life insurance quotes and see how it works and how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Tucker.
So, Tucker, I mentioned to you that she blew through those campaign finance limits.
Yeah.
And she was given a pass if she issued corrective apology and disclosure to the public. So how she did that was she had a door hanger, and those of us who are involved in politics, you go walk doors, you knock on the doors, and you hang a door hanger with your materials. So she replaced her door hanger with this Kamala Harris folded door hanger. And then in the tiniest possible print.
Would you like my glasses?
Yeah, I'll put mine on. Let me show you. I mean, due to an error by the Kamala Harris campaign, the voter information pamphlet indicates that the campaign has agreed to voluntarily limit campaign spending. This is incorrect. We take responsibility for this error. Now, this is printed on the top of this hanger. So you hang it on the door.
There's
and
no way.
The normal wage slave coming home from their actual job where they worked, a full day, unlike Kamala Harris, would go and then
people who are not dating Willie Brown, you mean?
Those of us taxpayers who have private sector jobs, you come home and the first thing you do with this annoying piece of crap is tear it off, right? So this is the part that would fall to the ground when you tear it off and maybe clutch your mail and take it in. Nobody read this, like 3-point disclosure on this thing. And so because her patronage boyfriend had fixed it for her, she got away with this. Nobody else would be able to get away with this today, I can guarantee you. And so no shame, and that's how she got her start in politics, by breaking the rules. And so I mentioned to you these no-show jobs as well. She had the lowest attendance record of any of the attendees of these two commissions either. So on top of having a job where she got paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do very little, she didn't even show up and do that. But there's one more fact about this. In the city attorney's office, they had to keep timesheets. Now, you know a lot of lawyers. You've gotten bills from lawyers.
Yes, I have.
we bill by the hour, and
Yes.
we're supposed to record our time in tenths of an hour. Okay. So in the city attorney's office, you recorded your time that way. And so someone in one of these various campaigns she's been in over the years did a Public Records Act request for these hours. And her predecessor in her job at the city attorney's office was a now, I think, retired or semi-retired judge, Catherine Feinstein, the daughter of Dianne Feinstein, the former United States senator. So Feinstein had the job, and then Kamala Harris had the job. So if you compare their hours, you see that Kamala Harris, I think, worked one day over 8 hours in all the 3 years that she worked there. Dianne Feinstein's daughter regularly worked long, normal lawyer
She
hours.
worked one day over 8 hours in how long?
3 years. Yeah. And
She's just lazy.
yeah. And there were a number of days where she had block 8 hours, phone calls, research something, 8 hours. So she didn't work full days in that job. That's what any supervisor, I'm a supervisor of about 25 lawyers. If I saw timesheets like that, I would call that person in and put them on probation, because they clearly aren't working a full day's worth of work. They're block billing, they're putting down time, they're doing a lot of admin time, days and days of admin time, meaning I didn't work that day. I read the newspaper. I did continuing legal education. I did some, background research. She did not work those full days. That's what any supervising lawyer, being honest, would tell you. So that's pretty striking, because as it is, you're, only expected to work, sort of 9 to 5, unlike those of us who are working in the private sector, working much harder to make a living and keep our jobs.
Yeah.
There's no such accountability in the jobs that she's held. And so when she ran for DA, she claimed, I've tried hundreds and hundreds of serious felony cases. And she got busted by the tenants union saying, actually, you've tried 10 cases. And then she had to sort of, over the years, own that maybe she was affiliated with hundreds of cases. She didn't actually try them. And look, as you get more senior as a lawyer, you don't try every case. I get it. But in those early years of your career, if you're billing yourself as a top cop and a top prosecutor, normally people do. But that is not Kamala Harris.
You have an excellent memory, in general, but for this period 20 years ago, and you were around Kamala Harris, living in that world, met her, all that. When you see Kamala Harris now, does she seem like the same person to you?
So this is interesting, Tucker. I got the impression from the first time I met Kamala Harris when she strode into my friend's apartment in that small fundraiser of an extremely confident, competent, articulate person. Now, yes. I don't think she's a great lawyer, and I think she's hardly had much courtroom experience, but she exuded competence and confidence. And the Kamala Harris you saw as vice president of the United States seems to be a completely different person. Inarticulate, lacking confidence, almost like dazed or medicated in some way. And I don't know that, of course. I'm just telling you that the impression of somebody extremely competent and confident and able to talk about their record, their recent record, even falsely, with a degree of confidence and bravado. There's a couple of dynamics there. First of all, I think the record that she's been running on is way in the past. And so it's become part of her own personal hagiography that she's, yes. This brilliant, accomplished, stunning, top cop who criminals quake in their boots to see her. That's not true, but, she's adopted it, but it's also way in the past. But secondly, it feels like she's not able to articulate herself. There seems to be a veil of inability to string together complete and coherent sentences.
She seems afraid to me. And you saw it in the opening moments of her debate with Trump, where I thought she did well as the debate continued. But in the opening moments, it's worth looking at the tape again. You see her eyes. This woman's terrified.
Maybe it's imposter syndrome. I don't know what it is, but
can you explain
imposter syndrome is somebody who is successful, has reached certain levels of at least outward appearances of success, but yet is plagued by self-doubt that maybe I don't belong here.
Right.
What am I doing here?
I feel like I'm an imposter.
How did I find myself here? Like a bad dream.
Yes.
Like those dreams we all have before the exam that, you go in and you haven't studied and it's the final exam.
You're in your
That's
pajamas
the nightmare.
or something. Yeah.
You're in your pajamas or whatever. And so, but it isn't it can happen to any of us. And we all freeze sometimes in tense situations. But we've all seen her on the national and international stage doing increasingly incoherent word salad statements. We've just seen the incident with 60 Minutes substituting a completely incoherent answer that she gave to a question with something else that she did in another part of the interview, or maybe even taped afterwards. Who knows? I have no idea how 60 Minutes came up with that.
But 60 Minutes got caught lying about the interview.
60 Minutes has been caught blatantly fixing her incoherence for her. And, that has been the case with the mainstream media. And I think this is a theme throughout her career, dating back to that 2000, 2003, as she gotten her leg up in life by shortcuts, not by meritocracy. And then she finds herself in a position that is beyond her capabilities. And then she has to lie and exaggerate to maintain that position and get to the next level. But with the assistance of the Democratic machine in California, and to be fair to her, she's not the only person. I mean, Gavin Newsom is another example of somebody who has faked his way to the top. Javier Becerra, who's in the cabinet today, is a guy who had basically 1 year of legal experience before he became the Attorney General of California. And so California's machine has produced a number of underqualified and overconfident duds. But this person is seeking the top job of the United States with an exaggerated record, with a tattered history of sordid ways that she got to where she is, of numerous legal violations that could have resulted in criminal prosecution, just the campaign finance violations alone. And so, I can understand why somebody might have an imposter syndrome when that's their history.
Now, the sad thing is California used to be famous for producing things from the world's best ag to aerospace to great movies. And now it's like failed light rail projects in Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom.
And gaslighting the voters on so many levels. So, I mean, Kamala Harris promised to San Francisco voters to get elected that she was going to be tough on crime. The murder rate skyrocketed during her years as a district attorney. And why did that happen? Well, gangs in the whole Bay Area, they do talk to each other. I was talking to a prosecutor in her office a couple of days ago in preparation for our interview. And this prosecutor said, Harmeet, these criminals, you may think, oh, they're like, criminals are on the margins of society. They're subhuman. No, they're very smart. They communicate with each other. They know that if you are doing certain crimes in San Francisco, you're going to get a pass. If you're doing drunk driving in San Francisco, you were going to get a pass during Kamala Harris's tenure. If you did it in Alameda County, San Mateo County, Marin County, you would get prosecuted. So guess what? The criminals came to San Francisco to do their drug dealing, to do their break-ins, their hot prowl burglaries, their low-level offenses. Kamala Harris was notorious for being hard on gun possession by legal taxpayers, but extremely lenient to the point of multiple criminals who possess guns committing murders after she let them off with a slap on the wrist or no punishment at all. So there was a double standard there in her prosecution.
And that's a theme throughout the state where, they've legalized stealing.
Yep.
You can steal from stores. No one can do anything about it. But any store owner who tries to defend himself against violence or homeowner who tries the same will be prosecuted.
That's right.
Why? What is that impulse, that anarcho-tyranny? Where does that come from?
Well, there's two aspects of it. First of all, it's treating the successful people in society as criminals and putting them in a box. I mean, I'm a legal gun owner, and the scrutiny you have to jump through to get a gun legally in California is incredible. But if you are an illegal alien, you get a free pass. We were a sanctuary city before we were a sanctuary state. So Kamala Harris has long been in the camp of protecting those folks by simply looking the other way.
Breaking federal law, in other words.
Breaking federal law. And
how is that not insurrection, by the way?
I mean, I think the criminals have guns and they get away with it.
But how is it not? I mean, she's always running around calling all the J6, all the diabetic grandmothers languishing in prison, insurrectionists. But how is it not insurrection against the United States of America to allow foreigners in your state against federal law?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, it's even worse than that. There was an interesting situation where a criminal committed a crime in San Francisco while she was the district attorney. And that criminal was free to commit that crime because she had pushed for that criminal to be part of a program of rehabilitation. So there was a rehabilitation program where if you did some job training as someone arrested for a serious crime, you could avoid prison time. Well, an illegal alien is not entitled to hold a job. So San Francisco taxpayers, California taxpayers, under Kamala Harris's leadership, were paying for jobs training for illegal alien criminals to get out of their criminal sentences. And then they weren't even eligible to go on to hold those jobs. So one of those people committed a serious violent crime, shattering the skull of a taxpayer in San Francisco. And he was able to do that because Kamala Harris signed him up for jobs training when he isn't legally allowed under United States law.
Why would you want that? I mean, you clearly are trying to overthrow the society.
You're pandering to a particular element of society. I think eventually Democrats have wanted to legalize all of the illegal aliens in the country. That's not a secret now. They tried to lie about it in the past, but today that's a campaign promise of hers, that she wants to legalize all of these illegal aliens in the country and get their votes. So it's a long-term vote recruitment program by these folks. But look, you can't forget the detail.
So she's the insurrectionist. I mean,
she's the
trying
insurrectionist.
to overthrow the United States government and system and destroy democracy and invalidate our founding documents, our core freedoms. I mean, those are all species of insurrection, it would seem to me. She sounds like a criminal.
Well, she's broken a lot of laws over the years, just in the, white collar laws, but she's enabled hundreds, if not thousands, of criminals to go on to commit violent crimes and even fatalities. I mean, there are police officers in San Francisco who lost their lives because Kamala Harris was soft on the criminals who went on to kill them as one of their dozens of offenses. There's a long trail of victims in San Francisco and now California who have suffered because of Kamala Harris's soft on crime policies. And she's lied about it and gotten away with it. And it's kind of incredible that someone who increased the murder rate by many percentage points, who prosecuted almost no violent crimes in San Francisco during the many years she was a district attorney, she failed up to becoming the attorney general, where she went on to violate the rights of criminal defendants on a much more massive scale. But even before that, Tucker, one of the interesting incidents is in the last 2 years of her of her tenure as district attorney, she was embroiled in a major scandal involving the systematic violation of criminal defendants' rights. And in San Francisco, in the drug lab, there was a drug technician who was supposed to test the drugs. And this person was sampling the drugs, taking them home and sampling them and also making numerous errors. This was an open secret in the district attorney's office. So after, people mentioned it on numerous occasions, judges chastised the district attorney's office. Eventually, a top manager in the office sent a cover your ass email to Kamala Harris saying, hey, by the way, I think the head of this drug lab section is actually taking drugs and regularly violating protocols and handling evidence. Kamala Harris, instead of doing her immediate duty as a district attorney to inform all defense counsel in all the cases in which this lab technician had handled the drugs for testing, she sat on it for a period of 3 months. And it only came out not through Kamala Harris disclosing it. And so the judge in that case, Christine Mazzullo, excoriated the district attorney's office. Now, by this time, Kamala Harris had been the district attorney for 6 years. In the 6 years she was the district attorney, she created no protocol for disclosing to defense counsel this, what's called a Brady violation, a violation which is so massive that you have to disclose to the other side that there's been a potential due process violation that could be exculpatory. So she got in trouble for that. She went on after that, 2 years later, to become the attorney general of California. So there's literally no accountability for, by some accounts, 1,400 cases, either convictions or pending cases, had to be dismissed in San Francisco because of this due process violation of the rights of the accused. I personally litigated a case against Kamala Harris myself, and
Really?
I saw the same pattern. So I had an important civil rights case involving a sick applicant for a prison guard job in the prison department in Sacramento County. Kamala Harris was the attorney general when this case went to trial, was getting prepared for trial. And I had won this case at the administrative level. So I was able to prove at an administrative hearing for state employees that the civil rights of my client had been violated because he was denied a job with the prison department because of his articles of faith. He had a beard, he had a turban, and under federal equal employment law and state law as well, the state has to accommodate that. They had to, offer him the opportunity to take a different gas mask test and prove that he could do the job. Well, I won that case at the administrative level, which should have been a slam dunk for the state to agree that he should have this job. Well, Kamala Harris fought that decision all the way to eve of trial. And I remember getting the United States Department of Justice involved in this case. And it was only after the United States Department of Justice opened up a civil rights investigation from the Office of Civil Rights into the state corrections department and how the state was handling this particular case. And after I got a national coalition of civil rights organizations ranging all the way from the American Civil Liberties Union to the Beckett Fund, a conservative organization. So a whole panoply of almost 30 civil rights organizations. Only when I had a massive press conference on this issue did Kamala Harris, 4 years into this case, finally agree to settle the case. So, and why would she do that? Well, the prison guards union, it turns out, only wanted accommodations for certain people, but not others. And they didn't want this newcomer coming into their ranks. So there was a blatant violation of my client's civil rights. But I finally won, but only after exerting outside pressure. And this has been her pattern typically. She's only willing to back down, not because she's wrong, but because she's embarrassed or confronted publicly. And even then, she's had such a entire career of faking her way to the top that there's just no shame there. And, she's willing to continue to lie until she gets
How'd she
caught.
get to be Attorney General of the state of California after failing as a prosecutor for San Francisco County?
Well, again, it's the machine politics of California. You mentioned Gavin Newsom. At the same time, there was consideration of whether Kamala Harris might run for governor. And basically in the upper echelons of Democrat politics in California, these things are all worked out in advance. Multiple people might want the job, and I can guarantee you that's happening right now in the case of Nancy Pelosi, who's reaching the end of her career at some point of her, it'll naturally expire. But there's a lot of jockeying like that. Which constituency? Is it going to be gay? Is it going to be Asian? Is it going to be Black? Who's going to get the prize? So it's kind of like that. So
that's all that matters, then.
All that matters is identity politics. So, at that point in time, she was a district attorney and she could have run for multiple different offices. Senate wasn't open at the time, so she ran for the attorney general position. And so despite this massive, and I could go on for hours, I have a dossier of horrific instances of gross civil rights and human rights violations that occurred on her watch. She had the resume and she had the powerful backing. And she checked the boxes of identity politics. First woman, first African-American, first Indian-American. So she checked those boxes. She ran. Now, she ran against a highly competent, seasoned district attorney of Los Angeles County, Steve Cooley, who I consider a friend and who's been a fellow warrior in the pro-life movement with me. Steve Cooley ran the strongest campaign that year of all the campaigns, and he narrowly lost by just a handful of votes. He was winning on election night. This is a familiar story to people who've been watching elections recently. He was winning on election night, and then in California, we don't have election day. We have election 2 months. People are able to vote for 30 days before the election, and then they have 30 days to count the votes. In Florida, by the way, they typically announce the results of an election on election night, like in civilized countries. But in California, we don't do that. So,
because that just makes it easier to cheat.
Makes it easier to cheat.
Yeah.
100%. So she won extremely narrowly. I think it was like 2,000 votes statewide in a state of 40 million people. She won extremely narrowly, and she won weeks into the election counting, ballot counting period.
I think we can maybe not prove, we can assume cheating.
That was certainly suggested. I can't prove it today, but I can say that when you're talking about a single party state, machine politics, differential application of safeguards on how votes are counted, like some counties match the signatures, some counties don't bother to do that, even though that's required under the law. Some counties look the other way on irregularities on things like, is the ballot dated? Some don't. Some counties, Los Angeles County is a prime example, have over 1 million voters on the voter rolls at that time who were not entitled to be on the rolls. Dead, having moved, multiple registrations.
Over 1 million?
Over 1 million. A 2017 settlement after a lawsuit by Judicial Watch in Los Angeles County showed that in Los Angeles County alone, there were over 1 million people on the rolls who should have been removed. And they entered into a settlement. And I think 4 years later, they still hadn't removed those people
crazy
from
town.
the voter rolls. And so when you have a state, you add COVID to that. So 4 years after 2017 is COVID, and you start having all male voting because of COVID. Suddenly there are a million extra
all mail,
ballots.
not the Saudi kind of all mail, but MAIL.
MAIL.
By mail.
Ballot, a mail ballot voting.
Because all mail voting would not allow Kamala Harris to be elected.
That's correct. That's correct. So in our system there in California, which by the way has now become the national system by default because crazy California politicians are now running the country in many ways, or seeking to run the country, it's a very dangerous situation for election integrity. And the person seeking the top job in the United States got her start with campaign and election violations, got away with it, has won elections while getting away with it, and is now seeking that top job. So if anyone thinks that she would qualm or have any second thoughts about violating the law to get what she wants, she's done it many times in her career.
So this is a stressful time of year. The kids are going back to school. Vacation is over. It's the height of a presidential election season. There's a lot going on. You need a good night's sleep, but it's never been harder to get it. So we were talking about this in the office the other day, and a couple people who work here were raving about a product called 8 Sleep. And I wanted to know more about it. It turns out that temperature has a lot to do with whether or not you sleep comfortably and wake up feeling rested, like you actually slept. Now, the makers of 8 Sleep Pod figured out that if you make a climate-controlled mattress cover, you can add to your existing bed. You don't have to buy a new bed, just the cover. That it changes everything. You get far fewer problems with falling asleep and staying asleep, and so you feel rested the next day. Sleep actually has its desired effect. The 8 Sleep Pod can be used to warm up or cool off your bed. And that matters because temperatures change seasonally. We have climate change in this country. It's called winter. And so you can feel comfortable all night long. It even adjusts to different preferences on either side of the bed, which might be helpful in your relationship if you have one of those relationships where the different partners want different temperatures. And those are pretty common. The 8 Sleep Pod has been studied. It's been proven to improve people's sleep and health. Mark Zuckerberg's into it. Elon Musk on the other side. Many others use this product, including people here. So try it. Go to 8sleep.com/Tucker. Use the code Tucker to get $350 off the Pod 4 Ultra. Recommended.
What kind of attorney general was she?
Well, she had a couple of big flashy cases involving so-called consumer protection, but civil rights organizations criticized her for repeatedly violating the rights of the accused. There were several instances of actual innocence claims by convicted felons who claimed that it was a case of false identity or otherwise. And her attorney general's office rigidly took the position that on a technicality, for example, that someone had failed to raise this claim in a timely manner, because they're an uneducated criminal, they should lose the right to prove their innocence claim. She won on some of these, and she lost on some of these. We had prison overcrowding lawsuits in California during the time that she was the attorney general, and federal judges ordered California to release lower-level criminals from prison due to prison overcrowding. Kamala Harris was nearly held in contempt of court for failing to do this. And the reason that her office gave under her direction for not obeying a federal court order to sustain the civil rights of these inmates was because California has a lot of wildfires, and prison inmates are used as cheap labor to fight those fires. And who's going to fight the fires if we don't have the free or cheap labor of the prisoners to be able to do that? I mean, it's akin to saying who's going to pick the cotton if we free the slaves. And that's an argument made by our Attorney General, Kamala Harris. And
there are tens of millions of illegal aliens in California. You wouldn't think they would have a labor problem.
No, but that's a whole other argument there. I mean, I think the left is systematically counting on the votes of people who aren't entitled to vote in multiple different ways in order to try to win this coming election. I mean, they have gone to court repeatedly. The Mark Elias through the Democrat machine that Kamala Harris is now enjoying the full support of, to block voter ID laws. It's illegal in California to ask for voter ID. And this is after some jurisdictions tried to pass at a local level, Huntington Beach. voter ID requirements when you register to vote, when you vote. And so the left in this country wants to make it illegal to ask for ID in just about every other way. To register, to check into a hotel last night, I had to show my ID.
Of course, to do anything.
To do anything, you have to do that.
So if you don't have to produce an ID to vote to choose the government, why do you need to produce one to buy a firearm?
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
So she seemed to have, just watching, having fled in myself, California, decades ago, I'm just watching this on the news, but she seemed to have special animus toward pro-life people.
Yes. Thank you for raising that. So I represent David Daleiden, who is one of the most courageous young Americans I've had the privilege to represent in my 31 years of practicing law. David went undercover in a long-form undercover investigation spanning years, posing as a purchaser of fetal tissue in order to expose Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Federation's systematic violation of federal law. It's illegal in the United States, as it should be in every civilized place, to buy fetal remains for any reason. But there's, in fact, a brisk trade in fetal remains. And Planned Parenthood and its members of the National Abortion Federation members were circumventing or flouting federal law by offering price lists for different parts of fetal remains. And this is a con on multiple levels. So women who are unsure when they went into a abortion clinic what they should do, they're in a crisis, their boyfriend has abandoned them. One of the selling points used by these abortion merchants is, the remains of your child will go to a good cause. They'll be used for research. It's illegal to sell those remains, but actually Planned Parenthood clinics were caught offering them for sale to researchers. And so David busted them by taping in San Francisco hotel lobbies at abortion trade shows. Believe it or not, a National Abortion Federation runs trade shows for abortion providers. He collected this testimony, this evidence by himself and with a couple of other helpers over the years, and then exposed it in video recordings that he made public. Now, that would be called journalism, I think. It used to be called journalism. Hardly anybody does that work anymore, going undercover like he did. And it was very brave, and it was explosive. As a result of this testimony, several states opened up investigations, and in some states, public funding was stripped from these clinics who did this horrific act of selling human body parts, arms, legs, livers. I mean, there was a price list that these people were circulating. And so this was obviously very upsetting to Big Abortion. So Big Abortion, which is a big supporter of Kamala Harris and other big-time Democrats in California, they can be counted on regularly to contribute millions to their campaigns. So Big Abortion went to Kamala Harris and asked her to prosecute David Daleiden. Now, there's this pesky little problem called the First Amendment. And the First Amendment allows citizens to do journalism. And so multiple jurisdictions in the United States have ruled that journalists going undercover, even if there's a wiretapping statute, are not to be prosecuted for that because of the First Amendment. They're exercising their free speech rights. Well, California has a wiretapping law. It's never been used against a journalist. So it's a single party consent state. So under the rule, both people have to consent to the taping. Now, the exception is if it's in a public place, which most of these tapings, arguably all of these tapings in California were made in a public place. So Kamala Harris ignored the First Amendment and custom made the first prosecution of a journalist in California history. So David Daleiden was indicted for undercover journalism 7 years ago. And his case has been pending now for 7 years in San Francisco Superior Court. Judge after judge after judge has not been willing to send a journalist to prison, not been willing to bring it to a head. And so people just keep changing assignments, and David remains on the hook, paying all this money to defend himself from the charge of doing journalism.
What penalties does he face?
He faces years in prison. if he's convicted.
Did Kamala Harris prosecute any of the companies where people illegally selling baby parts?
No, of course not. There's been no accountability for them.
So
in
she
California.
prosecuted the person who told the truth about what was happening, but not the people who were committing the crime.
That's correct.
That seems evil.
Well, it is evil. I mean, it's characteristic of her double standards and lack of morality throughout her entire professional life. I think it's. Look, I mean, when people are looking and when she's embarrassed, she does the right thing. I mean, there's a case of a death penalty inmate who was wrongfully convicted, and it was only after somebody circulated the embarrassing Ninth Circuit argument where her office made ridiculous arguments that she reversed herself and dropped her office's opposition to letting this person go free. So now what's scary about this, Tucker, is, as you and I both know, without Elon Musk being willing to invest in X and allowing us to have a free speech platform, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation publicly right now, right? Well, Kamala Harris wants to make it illegal for journalists to expose the wrongdoing that public officials regularly commit. And so if you don't have the media accountability and you don't have the ability to speak freely and criticize these politicians, they get away with crimes themselves. And so she has made it a hallmark, not only of her current campaign, but dating back to her campaign for president in 2020, that people shouldn't be allowed to speak freely on the internet. We must be able to, I mean, she confronted Elizabeth Warren during one of these debates, trying to get Elizabeth Warren, no shrinking violet herself, to agree that we must have censorship online. And Elizabeth Warren kept trying to change the subject, to her credit. You know, she didn't want to agree with Kamala Harris that, yes, we must force X and every social media platform to censor commentary that might be dangerous, not just false, but so-called malinformation.
Right. Something that criticizes bad leadership.
Exactly. So she wants to make it illegal for us to have this kind of a conversation. And in Kamala Harris's United States, it would be illegal for us to criticize the government because that might be dangerous. It might give people the wrong ideas.
Right.
And,
they might lose control.
They might lose control. And their hostility to free speech. I mean, you know, you saw the vice presidential debate recently where a sitting governor of the United States, her running mate, spouted wrong information about the First Amendment, saying that, for example, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, which is dicta from a overruled case that was a shameful case involving censorship of flyers during World War I, criticism of the government. That
truly a shameful case.
Truly a shameful case. And that
people who objected to getting into the most pointless war of all time, which was the First World War, for no reason whatsoever other than the vanity and ambition of our politicians. Anyone who criticized that went to jail. And a lot of people did go to jail.
People did go to jail for that. And, you know, he also tried to state the canard that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Hate speech is absolutely protected by the First Amendment. There's no such thing as hate speech. Hate speech is a relative term, which is whatever whatever you don't like. Exactly. Whatever you don't like. And so the freedom that we enjoy today on social media, in some circles, X specifically, would go away under Kamala Harris's regime. And she has gotten power and abused it repeatedly throughout her career. And we saw her shameful performance in the Kavanaugh hearings, you know, for example, where she used her platform to pretend to be this big prosecutor and to hold Brett Kavanaugh accountable on zero evidence. But it's very selective. You know, when someone close to her is accused of sexual misconduct and violence, her husband, she's silent, you know?
So let's explore that in a little more detail. So she marries a guy called Doug Emhoff.
Yeah.
Who is kind of a moral scold himself. His job has been to scold the rest of us for our moral inferiority, I've noticed. But who is he exactly?
So Doug Emhoff is a lifetime, long-term partner at big American law firms. And so he came of age, around the same time as Kamala, the 1990s era. He became a partner at this law firm, Venables, big partner in Los Angeles.
Can I say there's no sleazier group I've ever met? I mean, a lot of big law partners. I would rather make a rapper the godfather to my kids than those people. Sorry, I just want to say that.
And I grew up in that kind of a setting in New York, and you're absolutely correct. So, if anyone's seen the fictional series Mad Men, the advertising agencies, well, that was law firms in the 1990s and even 2000s. Some people say to this day, where powerful men exploited less powerful women for their sexual gratification, cheated on their wives, You want to make partner at some big law firms. And the time I was growing up, you had to sleep with a partner to do it. I myself accused a partner at my first job of sexual harassment. And, that person went on to still be a partner to this day at other big, powerful law firms. And so it's really commonplace. Okay. So this guy is in that vein of, that era of I would really call it regressive, male-centric law firm partnership. So Doug Emhoff has a couple of kids. He was married to a Hollywood executive, Hollywood producer, and divorced from her. They remain on good terms. In fact, Doug Emhoff's law firm has represented his ex-wife in litigation, actually, involving a entertainment dispute. So they're on good terms. Maybe he's done her some favors or what have you. But Kamala Harris dated Willie Brown, dated some other powerful men over the years.
Montel Williams, ladies and
gentlemen. There's been allegations that she dated Phil Bronstein, who ran the San Francisco Chronicle for many years.
Married Sharon Stone, I think.
And so
got eaten by some kind of iguana at the zoo.
She's dated a lot of she's pretty much only dated powerful guys. Let's be honest, okay? I don't know any ordinary Joes who've come out of the woodwork to say, oh yeah, I was like the plumber and I dated Kamala Harris, right?
What is that? What's the significance of that?
The significance of it is she's a user. I think she's a, ambitious person, and she's only, wanted to climb the rungs of power by aligning herself in a very medieval way with people who can further her geopolitical interests, if you will. So Emhoff fits that bill. He had access to the millions of Hollywood. He had access to the law firm money. And he, is a person who gave her entree that really helped her out a lot in her Senate fundraising and so forth. So, she's married this guy. In recent weeks, it's come out that he is very credibly accused by a woman who's told her story to multiple publications of publicly slapping her at the Cannes Film Festival, where this lady had been invited. In the face so hard that she spun around from it. And he did it because after a couple of cocktails, he was apparently very jealous. She went up to a valet to try to jump the line a little bit after waiting over an hour after the film festival got out, and was trying to tip him to let them cut the line. And he got jealous of this and publicly assaulted her.
Hit her in the face. And she immediately
reported this to multiple friends of hers. And under the law, this is considered what we call an excited utterance. So if you tell somebody something horrible that happened to you in the immediate seconds and minutes afterwards, it has assigned a higher degree of credibility under hearsay law than otherwise.
For good reason. Yeah.
Right, because people are more likely to be truthful when they've got the adrenaline running through them in the moment of what exactly just happened. So because of the dynamics of the situation, she allegedly got into the car. The valets were shocked by this disgusting scene and, let them go. He forced his way into the same car. So while she's in the car with this person, the story goes that the Daily Mail has reported, she called somebody she knew back in the United States and told them what was happening. Then she also reported it to a couple of friends of hers. And so her story has apparently been consistent according to the witnesses who the press has interviewed. And that's one instance. But the more shocking part of the story is that this woman recounts that Emhoff casually told her in the days or weeks before this incident, because she was she was being what she called love bombed by him. He was allegedly, pursuing her for marriage. This is after he got divorced from his wife, and they were dating for a period of months. She finally, I think it must have come up, how did you get divorced? Like, what happened to your marriage? And apparently he told her that he had been accused by his elementary school teacher's babysitter of getting her pregnant.
His elementary school age children?
Children's teacher, sorry.
Yeah.
Correct. Sorry, that's correct. So he had 2 elementary school kids at the time. And this teacher was serving as their after-school babysitter / nanny, tutor, whatever you want to call it, getting her pregnant and then causing the miscarriage, the loss of the pregnancy.
Causing the miscarriage.
Causing the termination of the pregnancy, not explicitly through abortion, but maybe through a miscarriage. That's the
violence,
accusation.
since he's
through violence.
Hit a woman in the face. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, now American.
He told her this?
He told her this casually. So American media being what it is today,
kind of a big deal. The vice president's husband, who's redefining masculinity and lecturing us all about bigotry all the time. What a sanctimonious little prick that guy is. That guy is accused of hitting a woman in the face and causing another woman to have a miscarriage.
Right. And I mean, dating back to my years in law school, I took 40 hours of training and became a counselor for victims of domestic violence. I've gone to court for many women who have been abused. And it's science behind it that someone who hits a woman once in a public place,
he's
almost in the face in front of hundreds of witnesses in a line. This person has done it in other circumstances. I would virtually guarantee that it doesn't happen one time. It's the culmination of a pattern of years of experience. Another story has come out about Doug Emhoff's conduct at his own law firm, Venables, where he apparently hired a lady to be his paralegal or his secretary sitting on his desk. And her name was Katya. And to the point that other male partners in the office demanded their own paralegal to sit on their desk. And this Katya episode happened during the time that Kamala Harris was engaged to be married to Doug Emhoff. She may have come into contact with this person.
So the implication is?
The implication is he uses women as objects and doesn't treat them as equals and doesn't respect them. I think that's fair.
Probably not too surprising that he's like some power feminist now, right?
Well, I think...
Have you ever met a male feminist who treats women well? I haven't.
One should always be suspicious of the male feminists. That's my experience.
I've never met anybody more likely to hit a woman in the face or cause a miscarriage than a male feminist. I mean, they're all abusers. I've never met one who was not an abuser of women, ever.
Well, what concerns me as a 30-year plus activist on domestic violence is the prospect that somebody like that might be in the White House. I think that's very scary. And that the president of the United States might be an enabler of somebody like that. That really bothers me.
Well, yeah. So that's the obvious question. I mean, these sound like this is not Brett Kavanaugh stuff. These are credible.
I think it's very credible. These stories were sourced with multiple sources, and I think there's probably more that's going to come out. I won't be surprised.
And this is an actual human being making these allegations.
Actual human being making these allegations. And, they're making them to a person who has a history of looking the other way, enabling, being the beneficiary of...
Well, so that's the question. Kamala Harris is a huge defender of women. All the girls are voting for her because she's for women. What's her position on these allegations?
She hasn't commented. And, when she was running for district attorney, I've looked at her resume at the time, and she listed as one of her credentials being the chairman of the board of a domestic violence advocacy organization. She has promoted herself.
Oh, so perfect.
She has promoted herself as a prosecutor who's been, protecting women from sex trafficking and human trafficking. And I can tell you, just a quality of life issue in San Francisco, where I've lived for the last almost 25 years now, is that you can't get elected in San Francisco without checking the boxes of different constituencies. And one of those is the Chinese American Chinatown community,
Yeah.
which includes a lot of organized crime and sex trafficking. And in her years as district attorney,
And always has, by the
she
way.
never touched the sex trafficking dens in Chinatown. I walked through Chinatown on my way to work before it got, super dangerous in San Francisco.
Chinatown is dangerous now?
San Francisco is dangerous. I don't think there's any safe place in San Francisco.
It was one of the safest cities in the country.
It's tragic because it's a beautiful city.
Most beautiful.
It's like some would call it the Paris of the United States.
Cape Town. That's
Beautiful
right.
city. And during her years there, she really allowed sex trafficking to flourish. She was notorious as a prosecutor for only taking up the slam dunk cases. And even there, she had a very low prosecution rate in her later years. And so,
I mean, if you just descend, to 25,000 feet, she's this member of the law enforcement community, she says. She's the prosecutor in both San Francisco and then statewide in our largest state. And both the city of San Francisco and the state of California became more dangerous and chaotic during that same period.
100%. And so nothing happens overnight. So today's fentanyl bend that you see on every corner in San Francisco, the gangs of young criminals who come into the city to rip it off, you can trace all of that back to Kamala Harris's leadership. When she ran for district attorney in 2003, she proudly noted that she was one of the few prosecutors who was opposed to a proposed law, a proposition that would allow prosecutors to treat juveniles who committed violent crimes, prosecute them as adults. She was opposed to that. She wanted to protect the juvenile violent criminals and the people who would go on inevitably to commit greater and greater crimes. So she's been soft on crime at the same time calling herself a top prosecutor all these years. I mean, she has been open about what she is in many ways, but, packaged it in very slick terms. And because she's a woman and because she's a minority and because so much of our culture panders to this identity politics, she's been able to somehow get away with the Marxist substance of what she has been peddling.
She's a minority. It's hilarious. I mean, unless you're Hispanic, you are a minority in California, no matter what you look like or where your ancestors are from.
Right.
I mean, in a state like California where there's not a white majority, is it still meaningful to call yourself a minority?
Well, in San Francisco and in these circles, somehow there's this cognitive dissonance about it, right? And what's even, I come back to Amos Brown, who she did her first known violation of the campaign finance laws for in 2000 when she was a consultant for his campaign. Just last year, she traveled to Ghana with Amos Brown on a mission on behalf of the United States where she promised billions of dollars of aid to Ghana. And I juxtapose that with
Why Ghana?
Ghana, Africa in general. I don't know, some expiation of white guilt in the United States, that somehow we're responsible for crimes and impoverishment that has occurred over there. I don't know why, but we as a country, the Biden and Harris administration have promised billions of dollars to Africa at the same time that white Appalachia is drowning, and we've had this flood damage in North Carolina where I grew up, and no one's promising them even millions of dollars, much less billions. And so this is the administration, and this is normal. No one even comments on it, it seems.
Yeah, things are totally out of control. There's no doubt about that. How does she get from Attorney General of California to the Senate?
Well, again, it was the machine politics of California. And, in California, there's usually a game of musical chairs. And so one politician is anointed for the next office. And then, there's jockeying behind the scenes, and then people take their turn. I will say to the Democrats' credit that they're usually very disciplined about these issues. And, they'll have their vicious game of identity politics behind the scenes, right? But then one person will emerge from that and some deal making. Okay, you run for this, you run for that, you run for the other, you wait your turn. So it was Kamala Harris's turn to graduate from her 2 terms as Attorney General to run for the Senate and the pathway was cleared for her to do that.
So then, I mean, when you win the Democratic primary in California statewide, you're done.
Yeah, the opposition we always do as Republicans, and I've been a leader in the Republican Party. We always recruit somebody and run somebody, and they do their best, and they're usually better than the Democrat. But the Democrat funding mechanism is such, and the voter registration advantage is such in California that it's virtually impossible for Republicans to win statewide office. And indeed, it's been many years since we've won a statewide office in California. And so
it is a one-party state.
It's a one-party state, and one-party states become corrupt, and there's a lack of accountability, and the quality of the legislators goes down and down and down. And so the gene pool, if you will, for these higher offices in California is decreasing. And I mean, there was a point in time when you had a Jerry Brown. Now, of course, very liberal. I didn't agree with him on just about anything, but at least he was a accomplished person academically.
He's a dynamic, interesting person, actually.
He's a polymath.
I disagreed with him too. He's a big liberal, but Jerry Brown was not mediocre.
He was not mediocre, talented, intelligent. That is not the caliber of California Democrats today. I mean, I told you, for example, now cabinet member in the Biden administration, Javier Becerra, had barely practiced law before he was deemed to be appropriate to replace Kamala Harris as the Attorney General in California when she became United States Senator.
Barely practiced law.
I believe it was 1 year that he had practiced law. So he had an inactive law license for a period of time. He reactivated it.
Seriously?
That became the Attorney General. That's the standard. It doesn't matter. It's just a waiting room for the next office and the next office. So it's going to become interesting to see who's anointed by their machine to replace Gavin Newsom. But we are in California behind this iron curtain of the left, and taxpayers are just at the mercy of these increasingly mediocre Marxists in California. So,
well, this is why the productive people have left.
Yep, it's something that every taxpayer definitely has to think about. And it's
what do you pay all in? Would you say in California? What percentage of your gross income goes to the government?
I pay well over 50%. Let me give you some facts. In San Francisco, there's a payroll tax. So those of us who earn a wage in San Francisco, and I'm an employer in San Francisco, have to pay a payroll tax on every employee. It's over a percentage point of every employee that I hire over there. If you're making over a couple of $100,000, you're paying 13.5% income tax in San Francisco, in California rather. And then on top of that, you're paying the federal taxes as well. So for that, what do you get? You can't go into a drugstore in California today and pick up a deodorant and take it to the counter. You have to call an assistant to come and unlock it for you in any city in California, because we have a law that effectively legalizes theft under $950. And so I've witnessed gangs of criminals come into my CVS or Walgreens and just steal hundreds of dollars of stuff right in front of my eyes, thousands of dollars of stuff. They bring in bags, they put it into the bags, they walk out, and the employees of these stores are disciplined by their employers if they take any steps to try to interfere with this
shoot them.
Wholesale larceny. Absolutely. And by the way, it would be dumb to interfere with them because they have weapons, and you as a citizen don't have a weapon typically. It's virtually impossible. In San Francisco still, there's only in the dozens of people I think have gotten concealed carry permits to carry after, the Supreme Court has effectively made that mandatory as a shall issue. So there's a huge imbalance there. And the criminals are on the ascendancy, and the Democrat politicians who made that so keep failing upward. And, Kamala Harris is the most glaring example of that.
So there's a legislator in the state of California he's the one who legalized the intentional spreading of AIDS.
Scott Wiener, my state senator.
Yeah. So Scott Wiener, the most obviously evil politician in America. I mean, I don't think there are many evil politicians, but he's the one who tries the least hard to hide it. Does he have any connection to Kamala Harris?
Only in the sense that they're both heirs of the same machine.
Yeah.
He's part of that machine. So, I've shown you some flyers here of the people who've endorsed her. He was anointed as the next senator after Mark Leno. It's been considered to be a gay Senate seat. That's how they identify the politics there. And so
it's a gay Senate seat?
Yeah, like it's reserved for the, gay Democrat politician who's next in line in San Francisco. So
are we sure they're gay or they're just pretending to be gay?
I think we're pretty sure Scott Wiener's gay. He's a regular fixture at the Folsom Street Fair, wears bondage gear, and is very out about that.
Yeah. Wears bondage.
Performative.
Totally cool. Yeah. That's not weird. So I was really surprised during the Democratic primaries of 2019 to discover how unpopular Kamala Harris was in the state of California.
Yeah.
And that was really, as a native Californian, the first moment I realized voters don't play a meaningful role in kind of anything in California.
Right. I mean, so what's interesting is you got a lot of politicians out there who are Democrats who have some charm, some charisma.
For sure.
Some would even call Joe Biden somebody earlier in his career. I don't know about
he had a lot of charm, a lot of I knew him. Barbara Boxer, who I disagreed with on everything. Barbara Boxer, very charming woman, just being honest.
I mean, Dianne Feinstein even had a better pulse on the people when Kamala Harris, as a district attorney, refused to seek the death penalty for a cop killer in San Francisco in her first year as district attorney. Dianne Feinstein called her out on it. And she said, if there were ever a special circumstance, it's a gangbanger shooting a cop in cold blood. And, she had the common touch. She had the charm. And Kamala Harris is just lacking charisma. And, you try to unpack that and analyze it. Well, if you have had everything handed to you from a fairly early age, and she started getting her leg up, if you will, and the age of 29 in politics.
I'm stealing that. Is it catty? Yes. Is it awesome? Oh, yeah.
You don't have to earn it. You don't have to try very hard. And so she's unlikable. She's got that scoldy, school marmy way about her, preachy way about her. And she hasn't had to be likable to get to where she is. You think about her choice. She was not the obvious choice for vice president for many of us. Like, people would have said Gretchen Whitmer, somebody from the Midwest, someone who's adding something to the ticket. But the politics of the Democratic Party have become such that their most loyal constituency today is African-American women. And so, Joe Biden himself was a marginal candidate. And so the calculation was made that we need to pick the best African-American female candidate. And they had a list of 3, and Kamala Harris was selected to fill that role. She wasn't the most talented. She wasn't the most charismatic, but she checked a couple of boxes for the Democrats. And that's how he was paired with her. And if Joe Biden and Jill Biden had thought about it, they might have gone back and asked Terrence Hallinan, who gave Kamala Harris her start in San Francisco, how that went for him. How did it go for him to hire her into the office and give her a chance? Well, she ate his lunch pretty quickly. And that's exactly what happened with Kamala Harris, who's been scheming, I suspect, since day one, getting into the White House, undermining Joe Biden, and, eventually clawed her way to the top of the ticket. And
has she ever created anything that you know of?
Well, she's responsible for many deaths of innocent people in San Francisco. She's created a lot of tragedy for victims of crime in our state. She's created a lot of civil rights violations. She has not created anything in the sense that you or I would consider a proud accomplishment. I can't think of anything.
What does she believe?
I think she, so she's famous for saying that I have one client and it's, you, the people. She has one client and it's Kamala Harris. She believes in Kamala Harris getting ahead. I think that's at her core, all that she fundamentally believes.
So she doesn't have a detectable philosophy or ideology or principled commitment to any set of ideas.
Well, not that I can tell. I mean, I think early on she adopted the persona of advocate for the downtrodden African-American youth. But I mean, that was
hilarious.
That itself was focus tested, I think. And
growing up in Montreal, the daughter of college professors, she's big in the civil rights movement.
Exactly. And, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal in 2019 when she was running for president, highlighting her flip-flops as a prosecutor on marijuana, on truancy, on many other forms of crime and other policy issues. And she's unashamed about it. And she just says, well, I've evolved. Circumstances have changed. She's evolved on just about every single issue. And what that tells you is there is no fundamental core there. And you can look at a Bernie Sanders, for example, complete Marxist, far left, but he's kind of been consistent throughout his whole, you know where you stand with him. Yep. He isn't going to suddenly embrace drilling or, any particular issue that he's been opposed to. You know where you stand.
He lived in like a yurt in Vermont in the 70s. So, whatever you think of yurts in Vermont, he seems to mean it.
He's authentic.
Yeah.
And you can't say the same of Kamala Harris. She's pronounced her name differently over the years. Yes. She's adopted different personae depending on who she's speaking to. She's flip-flopped on marijuana usage, on gun ownership. She claims she owns a Glock today. I would, I don't think she knows how to load a weapon. I seriously doubt she knows how to.
She has bodyguards that we pay for.
Yeah, exactly. And so she's supposed advocate for victims of domestic violence, and yet silent when her husband is credibly accused of the same.
Hitting a woman in the face. This is my last question. If she is elected president, it's the second week of October as we're having this conversation. Trump is ahead, substantially ahead, appears to be, in internal polling, which I think is real. But, the Democratic Party cheats. They're going to cheat in this election. We can say confidently, if she becomes president, what is the country in for, do you think, based on what you've seen?
Well, the Democratic Party of today has become the party of big business and pharma. So I think they're also the party of the warmongers.
Yes.
So I think you can expect big warmongering and neocons to be happy with the level of quote unquote investment in other people's countries. You can expect the forced taking of drugs that Joe Biden tried to force on all American employers to in turn force on their employees, the ineffective COVID vaccines that don't prevent what they claimed, and other drugs. America is one of only 2 countries in the world that allows drugs to be advertised on television. And, the Democratic Party is definitely, both parties, but certainly the Democrats are definitely taking from that side. But the most scary thing to me is the conversation that you and I are having, that presumably a lot of people are going to see, will not be possible in Kamala Harris's United States. She has openly called for the censorship of viewpoints that she doesn't agree with. And you can expect the permanent change to the United States Supreme Court of stuffing term limits, otherwise corrupting it away from the vision of the founders. And I think you can expect so many other innovations that Democrats have talked about, innovations like eliminating the Electoral College, national popular vote, as our way of permanently putting rural Americans under the heel of the corrupt coastal elites. So the way of life that my parents brought me to the United States as a small child to enjoy will not be available to Americans under the vision of Kamala Harris that she's openly promising.
How will you respond if she's the president in January?
I'll be part of the resistance.
Yes.
That's the only way to live. I will not live on my knees. So we will have to fight that in whatever corners of the country and whatever courts that'll still hear us until we're silenced.
So if the laws change, and she has promised to change them, and she has the support of the Atlantic magazine and basically everyone in Washington, and free speech ends in America, and you can be punished for saying things the regime doesn't like, will you stop talking?
I will not stop talking, and I know you won't either, Tucker.
I won't.
No.
I'll go to jail before I do that. Do you think Americans, to the extent we can know, but they took the COVID vax, I got to say. I say that with great embarrassment. People did stand passively by and allow their civil liberties to evaporate during COVID. Do you think people will do the same when their free speech right is taken from them?
People are doing it. People did it. People did it in the years after 2020, in the years before 2020. so many Americans have passively allowed, I would date this back to the Patriot Act in 2001, when I was one of the few Republicans who stood up and said, it is wrong to interrogate Americans on the basis of their background. It is wrong to surveil Americans and all of our communications. And today, in the name of national security, Republicans and Democrats have repeatedly enabled the deep state and the big state to collect all of our communications and surveil us, and for our own good, force us to take drugs and censor what we're allowed to see. And so those Americans who are getting their news from, cable and the nightly news and the networks are seeing a version of Plato's forms. It's a distorted vision of reality. And so without the free speech that the founders so wisely guaranteed as our first of those civil rights in the Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment, which allows us to defend those rights, this isn't a country anymore. And I think that's the apocalyptic future that we're facing.
I remember you right after 9/11. I should say, for those who don't know this, but you're from a religious tradition that's a small religious minority in India. And they were mistaken for radical, it sounds funny now even to say it, radical Muslims. I guess it's not funny at all, but there were a lot of...
People lost their lives in the wake of 9/11 because they were mistaken, 6 were mistaken as people from Afghanistan or the Middle East.
But completely different religion, nothing to do with it.
Completely different religion, totally different. In fact, 6 fought against Muslim invaders in India and safeguarded that whole subcontinent from invasion. And so it's no joke to us to have our right to exercise our faith, to not have the FBI show up at your door because of ignorance and start interrogating.
And by the way, even if I should just say, as a matter of principle and fact, I know a million great Muslims personally who I love. And so even if they had been Muslims, you can't hassle people because of their religion.
And then the ACLU, and which I joined back then because of this specific issue, was the only voice in America fighting against Muslims being rounded up and interrogated in Los Angeles in 2001. It's abhorrent, and it smacks of Japanese concentration camps and other dark periods in our American history. And today, those voices aren't there. So conservatives have always relied on liberal civil rights activists to safeguard those rights. Hey, you know what? Conservatives sometimes get falsely arrested for crimes.
That's for sure.
And today, those liberal groups have abandoned those principles. So today, it's Republicans and conservatives who go to court. It's my nonprofit, the Center for American Liberty, that goes to court to defend the rights of students to hear differing viewpoints on campus, or to defend young girls from being mutilated by abusive doctors in the name of transgender craziness. And so today, we are the civil libertarians. Ill-prepared as we are institutionally, conservatives are the last bastion to defend our country from
I think you're absolutely right. And they're waking up to it. And I just want to say, I want to add to the list of things I've apologized for over the years, including the Iraq War. I didn't perceive just how scary and anti-American the Patriot Act was. You were one of the very first people on the right. You were definitely the first person on the right I saw say that, and bless you for catching that immediately.
Well, again, we go back to the Constitution. And when I look at this election, Kamala Harris has shown herself over all of her decades of public service exactly who she is. She's someone who is ruthless, who has ignored the law when it benefits her, who has even ignored as a guardian of the law, the Constitution repeatedly, the rights of the accused, the rights of the wrongfully convicted, the rights of the citizens she has sworn to defend, and those laws that she has sworn to uphold. She has ignored them when convenient. And I think that's particularly when you take on the mantle of, I'm the top cop, I'm the border czar, I'm the prosecutor, I'm America's top law enforcement person. It's scary that person wants to be the number one person with the most power in the free world. And so that's what's at stake in this election. So it isn't about mean tweets. It isn't about style. It's about what country we want in the next 4 years.
It's a wonderful summation. Harmeet Dillon, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
We had a pretty remarkable interview with Elon Musk the other day, right after his appearance with Donald Trump at the rally in Butler Township. Elon Musk is all in. This is an interview we highly recommend. It's over on X. Check it out if you have a minute.